He never spoke about Vietnam, not to his children, not even to his dying wife. But now, 82-year-old James Riley has returned not for forgiveness, but to keep a promise made beneath a leaking roof, beside a woman who hid him, and a dog who chose him. There is a grave he needs to visit, not of a man, but of something more loyal than one, and a secret he has carried for 60 years, buried deeper than any wound he left with. Part 1: The Return. Quang Trar Province, Central Vietnam, March 2025. The old man stepped off the bus with knees that did not trust the gravel. A cane pressed into the red dirt. His boots, newer than they looked, sank an inch deep, like the land remembered him and was not ready to let go. He stood there a moment too long, squinting at the low, tiled rooftops, the tamarind trees, and the haze that blurred the hills beyond. And Chicken Jip Rection, a young man asked. Smiling gently, James Riley nodded. Looking for? None, he said slowly, clutching a folded photo. She lived here in 1965. The boy did not answer. He called an older man over. A minute passed. Then the elder stared at the photo for a long while before exhaling. "Li nun and re," he said softly. "An hai ani I nun ram rai. Mung theo takai." James followed him down a narrow footpath, past quiet gardens and chickens scratching at the soil. The village had changed, but the silence had not. He remembered it. This was where fear once lived in every leaf, and kindness came only in whispers. They stopped at a low wall of sun-faded brick. Beyond it lay a small grave, raised higher than the others, ringed by pebbles. The marker was not a name. It was a word scratched in cement. Beneath it, the outline of a paw print. James knelt. Bones creaked. He brushed the dust from the stone. "I made it back, boy," he whispered. He took out an old photo, crumpled but clear. In it, a woman stood beside him, laughing awkwardly, one arm resting on a thin brown dog with ears like sails. Behind them, a rice field and a hut with bamboo walls. He placed the photo gently on the grave. The man beside him asked, "Quang Quen ha?" James nodded. "That dog saved my life." Then he said nothing more for a long time, only stared at the paw print, while the wind stirred the grass. And with that wind, the past began to howl back. 1965, 60 years ago. Operation Steel Tiger, Laos border to central Vietnam. March. Rainy season. Mist rising like ghosts from the jungle floor. Private First Class James Edward Riley, 22 years old, dropped fast and crooked from a C-130 over the Annamite Mountains. The wind caught him crossways. The canopy opened late. He landed too hard, just short of a ridgeline, crashing into a cassava thicket near a narrow footpath he never saw. Pain shot up his right leg like fire. He tried to stand, collapsed, tried to call for help. Only frogs answered. He drifted in and out of blackness for hours or days until something warm nudged his face. A snout. A tongue. Breath smelled like dried fish. Then the bark came. Short, sharp, urgent. Not attacking calling. Through cracked eyes, James saw it. A small, scrappy dog, fur like straw, tail curled, one ear torn. It barked again, circled him, then sprinted toward a clump of banana trees. Minutes passed. Then footsteps. Not boots. Bare feet. Sandals. A woman appeared. About 40, with a deep tan and strong arms. She wore a white blouse, mud-stained at the hems, and carried a satchel with herbs. She gasped when she saw him, clutching her chest, but the dog still barking nudged her forward. James tried to lift his hand. "Don't shoot," he murmured. The woman blinked, then, in quiet French, said, "Vas ites?" American. He exhaled. "Owie." She stepped forward, leg broken. He croaked. She crouched, examined the leg, then looked at the dog. "Dusty," she whispered, as if they would done this before. "Bunjo." That night, under a leaky thatched roof behind her small house, she crushed roots and wrapped his thigh in banana leaves. He heard her humming softly, and the dog breathing at his feet. Part 2: The Woman Who Taught French to Ghosts. Central Vietnam, March 1965. Her name was Nun. She spoke French like a schoolteacher from Hague, soft and careful, with the accent of someone who once believed the world could be civilized by books. She said she had once taught at a lifey before the war made students disappear. Now, she taught no one. She grew vegetables, sold herbs, and lived quietly in a thatched house behind a stone wall, far from the market road, except for Dusty the dog who found James. For 2 days, James lay in her back room, part storeroom, part stable, resting on a bed of straw. Dusty never left his side. The pain in his leg came in waves. She gave him bitter tea that numbed his tongue. She spoke in French, sometimes English, asking short questions, giving soft answers. "Nom?" she asked. "James," he said. "James Riley." She nodded. "Jesus." "None." That night, lightning danced outside. The tin roof shook. Dusty growled low when thunder cracked, but stayed pressed to James' hip. James asked, "Why help me?" None paused, then answered, not in French, not in English, but in Vietnamese. "Vi kain la kan ang pi." He did not understand the words, but the tone said everything. "Because I am still human." On the 3rd day, she helped him outside. Dusty led the way through the garden, avoiding the sugarcane rows. barking when James leaned too far left. Nun Hun laughed. "He thinks he is your mother." They sat under a bamboo trellis while she boiled rice and pumpkin. James tried to speak in fragments. "War, not here to hurt." "Wrong landing." She stirred slowly. "War always wrong," she replied in French. "Landing just makes it closer." He pointed to himself. "Soldier, but not killer." She did not respond, only fed Dusty a piece of boiled taro and walked back inside. That night, she brought out a stack of old books, French poetry, grammar charts, yellowed and worm-bitten. "I used to teach," she said. "Children, until the war taught them fear instead." James studied her hands. They were scarred, not the scars of battle, but of work firewood, machetes, stone mortar. She handed him a pencil. "Write," she said. "Not speak. Write." So he wrote. His name, his hometown, Reno, Nevada. She nodded, cold. He laughed. "Yes, very." Then he drew a snowman, a Christmas tree, and a dog. She smiled. "Like Dusty." "No," he said. "Dusty, better." But shadows had begun creeping back into her world. That night, after Dusty barked toward the woods, Nun stood long by the window. She whispered something under her breath. James asked, "Danger?" She shook her head. "No, just wind." But her eyes were clouded. Later, when he lay half asleep, he saw her crouch beside Dusty, whispering to the dog in Vietnamese longer, slower, like giving instructions to a child. The next morning, Dusty was gone. James panicked. Nun calmly stirred the morning fire. "He will come back." "How do you know?" She looked up. "Because he is not a dog." Then, after a pause, "He is a soul." James sat outside, legs still weak, staring at the edge of the forest. What kind of soul? He did not know. But somewhere deep in that jungle, a brown shape moved just out of sight. And that night, footsteps returned to the house. Not Dusty. Boots, soft, silent, careful. Nun opened the door. A man stepped in from the darkness, tall, lean, dressed in brown, wet from the rain. She gasped. "Kwon." James leaned back in the shadows. He did not understand the words, but he understood the tone. Her son. The man's eyes darted across the room, then stopped. He saw James and said nothing. Part 3: The Silence Between Two Enemies. March 1965, Nun's home. Central Vietnam. The man stood dripping on the threshold, the muzzle of his rifle glinting under the oil lamp. He was younger than Nun, maybe 25, with sun-leathered skin, hollow cheeks, and eyes that did not blink. Nun's voice broke the silence. "Is I la line M?" Her words trembled, not from fear but from the weight of saying them aloud. The man's gaze never left James. James did not move. Couldn't he? His bad leg pinned him to the ground like guilt. The man stepped forward. He raised the rifle slowly, deliberately, but then Dusty barked. It came sharp. From just beyond the door, a blur of fur and mud shot past Nan, planting itself between the two men like a living wall. None cried. The dog growled low, steady, eyes locked on the rifle. The man stopped. None stepped between them. "Kandai," she said softly. "None be thang. Siva! MCU Enuthqui." The man lowered the gun slightly, then looked at her. Betrayed. "Ambit Kan Nang Chin Zu Choe Kang?" he asked, voice tight. Nan did not answer. James's breathing slowed. He understood almost nothing. He knew he would nearly died, and it was the dog who saved him. The man turned to go, his boots wet on the wooden floor. But before he left, he pointed at James and said one word, flat and cold, "Aye, aye." He disappeared into the night. That evening, none did not light a lamp. They sat in darkness. Rain tapped the roof like impatient fingers. James whispered, "Your son." She nodded. "Viet Cong." She hesitated, then replied in French, "He believes he is saving his country. And me." She looked away. "You were dying. That is all I saw." The next morning, James began preparing to leave. None did not stop him. She packed him dry sweet potatoes, wrapped in banana leaf. Dusty barked softly, tail wagging once, but his eyes were sad. James limped to the forest edge with a stick in one hand and Dusty beside him. He looked back once. None did not wave. She stood like a statue, hands folded, watching the path like someone staring at a tide she could not control. By noon, the sky had turned to smoke. Rain fell again, thicker, heavier, and then from the tree line a rustle. Too heavy for squirrels, too light for patrol. James paused. Dusty stiffened. His tail dropped. Then figures emerged. 3 brown uniforms. Axe. James raised his hands. Stumbled backward. Dusty barked once, sharp and lipped between them. One man raised his gun. Dusty growled louder. Then a voice cut through the rain. "Ayun Yi Bun." The one in front lowered his rifle. It was Quan. Again, he stepped closer, looked James up and down. "You do not listen," he said in slow, thick English. James held his ground. "I was leaving." Quan nodded slowly, then said, "You are lucky. Dog loves you." They stood in silence. "You fight for the wrong side," Quan said. James replied, "So do you." Neither smiled. Dusty sat between them. Panting, Quan pulled something from his pocket, a small compass, dented and rusted. He tossed it at James' feet. Follow river. 3 kilometers. American camp. Go fast. Don T looked back. James picked it up. Why help me? Quan's jaw tightened. Because my mother would cry if I did not. He turned and disappeared into the trees. Dusty did not follow him. He followed James. Part 4, a letter never sent. March 1965, en route to American. Firebase. Central Vietnam. Rain made the earth slick and the forest thicker than it was the day before. James leaned hard on the stick Quan had carved for him, each step a throb in his healing leg. But Dusty walked ahead, not leading, accompanying. He paused at forks in the path, looked back for a signal, then continued. The compass spun slowly in James' palm needle, trembling under cloud-thick skies. He remembered Quan's voice. 3 kilometers. Don T looked back. They moved slow, but steady. The jungle closed in like a lung. Once, Dusty froze, ears perked, then veered left, pulling James into a bamboo grove. Moments later, boot steps passed to their right. Vietnamese. One man coughed. Another spat. They waited in silence. James could feel Dusty's heartbeat beneath his hand. Not fear instinct. By late afternoon, the river came into view, wide, brown, full of rain. Across it, a low ridge. Beyond that, the faint echo of a helicopter. American territory. James' breath caught. He was close. He crouched at the riverbank, cupped the compass like a relic, and looked at Dusty. I made it. He whispered. We made it. Dusty wagged his tail once, then sniffed the wind. James stood, took a step forward, then stopped. He looked back, not at the trees, at something in his chest. He reached into his rucksack and pulled out a letter folded in plastic, written in shaky French, smudged by sweat and rain. He read it silently. It was addressed to Madame Nunn. Nunn, you saved my life. You gave me rice, water, rest, but you also gave me something I did not expect, a reason to question everything I thought I knew. Your son pointed a gun at me and still chose not to shoot. That is something I will carry for the rest of my days. But more than that, I will carry Dusty. I do not know what kind of creature he is, not just a dog. A spirit, maybe a soul that walks between borders and does not take sides. If only we were more like him. If I live, I will send this. If I die, I hope someone finds it. James Edward Riley. He sealed the letter again and looked across the river, then down at Dusty. No postal service in war zones. He muttered. Dusty sneezed, or maybe laughed. He fashioned a raft from fallen bamboo, tied with jungle vines. It was crude, barely enough for one man and a dog. Dusty hesitated. James climbed aboard, then patted the space beside him. "Come on, hero." Dusty jumped in muddy paws, slapping bamboo. The raft tilted. Balanced, the river took them. It was nearly dark when they reached the far side. American soldiers spotted him, rifles drawn, shouting. Then they saw the flag patch on his uniform soaked, torn, and rushed to pull him ashore. A medic cursed. "Crest, Riley, we thought you were dead." Another said, "Where the hell did that dog come from?" James smiled. "Long story. They tried to grab Dusty. He backed away, growled, only calming when James touched his head. Easy." James whispered, "We are home." But Dusty looked back across the river. That night, under canvas and morphine, James asked for a pen. He rewrote the letter carefully, despite his shaking hand. He sealed it in an envelope and addressed it to Madam Nunn, Quang Trar Province, Vietnam. He handed it to a corpseman. "Send this," he said. "Please." The corpseman nodded. But somewhere between that field hospital and the military mail system, the letter was lost, back in Vietnam. Nunn waited by the window each night for weeks. No one returned. Not her son, not the dog, only the wind. Part 5, The Names We Never Say Out Loud. April 1965, Firebase. Washington, American-controlled zone. Central Vietnam. James Riley was alive, but not whole. His leg had set wrong, his spirit even worse. The field medics said he would be rotated out within weeks. "You are lucky," they told him. But James did not feel lucky. He felt haunted, not by the firefights, not by the jungle, but by a small house in the trees, and the woman who fed him taro without asking who he voted for. Dusty stayed with him, refused food from anyone else. Wouldn't sleep unless curled at the foot of James' cot. He is not army property. James warned a sergeant. "I do not care." The sergeant said, "As long as he do not bite the co." Dusty became a quiet legend around the firebase. They said he could sense incoming mortars before the radar, that he barked at some soldiers and not others, like he could see things behind their eyes. To James, Dusty was not a pet. He was the last living thing that belonged to another world, the quiet one, where a woman hummed while slicing cassava, where no one spoke names unless they had to. One morning, James found Dusty staring at the jungle fence. Silent, frozen. Then he growled. Not loud, not showy, just enough to say, "Something's coming." That afternoon, a chopper came in fast and low. A soldier shouted, "Ambush at checkpoint Echo. We have got wounded inbound." James stood near the helipad. He was not cleared for field duty, but Dusty sat beside him. Ears flat, tail stiff. As the chopper touched down, James' stomach turned. They carried out 3 men bloodied, groaning, and one of them, One of them looked like Kwon. James pushed forward. A lieutenant blocked him. "You know that guy?" James swallowed. "I might." The Vietnamese man was unconscious, his shirt bloodied, but there was no weapon on him. The medics did not ask questions. They just worked. Dusty barked, then whimpered, then barked again, tail wagging. James knelt. "Is it him?" He whispered. Dusty licked his hand. That night, James sneaked into the medical tent. The man lay still, hooked to IV fluid, breath shallow but steady. James looked closely. It was not Kwon. Same age, same face shape. Different scar. James exhaled hard disappointment and relief crashing together. Dusty sat beside the bed, staring. The soldier stirred, eyes opened halfway. He saw James. Flinched. James raised his hands. "I am not here to hurt you." He said it in English, then French, then tried a few broken Vietnamese phrases none had taught him. Cong Sao, Hung Chin Tran, Tu Hai, Kok Bang Bun. It was not perfect, but the man understood. He blinked, whispered, "Tinanan." James smiled. "James." The soldier nodded, then turned his head and slept. Outside the tent, Dusty sat staring at the trees again. He did not bark this time, but his ears stayed up. James followed his gaze. Out there, somewhere beyond the fences and the tripwires, was a woman who had risked everything for a stranger, and a son who might now be either dead or still watching from the shadows. James did not know what haunted him more. The next morning, Dusty was gone. No one had seen him leave. No tracks, no trail, no paw prints, only a small clump of fur near the outer wire. And silence. James searched for days. He never found him. Dusty had gone back across the lines, the only creature allowed to walk between enemies, unseen and unclaimed. Back to Nen, or back to the earth. James never knew. He was shipped home 2 weeks later. But some part of him never left, and he never stopped calling out that name, not aloud, only in dreams. Dusty, Part 6, The Woman Who Waited for Ghosts, May 1965. Nun's home, Quang Trar Province. The dog returned at dawn, mud-caked, limping, eyes dull, but alive. Nun opened the door and dropped to her knees. She did not cry, only touched his ears. Murmured, "Vifai Rai, my V Rai." Dusty laid his head in her lap and closed his eyes. He did not move for hours. She checked for wounds. Found scratches, bruises, and a deep gouge on his flank. Something sharp. Barbed wire, maybe, or a trap. She cleaned it with boiled salt water. Dusty did not whimper. As she wrapped the wound in strips from an old dye, She whispered, "My hun son, Vale thing linem the sow. You are alive. So what about the American?" Dusty gave no answer. In the days that followed, Nun watched the forest with the silence of someone waiting for a voice she might never hear again. No footsteps. No letters. No boy in boots limping through the trees. But Dusty began to heal. He followed her to the fields again, sat beside her while she boiled roots, slept at the threshold like a statue carved from loyalty. And each night, she whispered to him, as if he were a messenger, "My anwai chotao bitsai, nananas and Sun Cong." Tell me, is he still alive? Dusty only blinked. One morning, a neighbor arrived with a whisper. American planes were bombing farther north. Quanah's unit might be involved. Nun Hun nodded, said nothing. But that night, she sat by the fire holding a tattered photograph, a younger version of her and Quan in hock, before war swallowed everything. Dusty rested his head on her foot. She looked at him. "You have seen both of them now, have not you?" Her voice cracked. "My son, the soldier I hid. Did they speak? Did they aim rifles? Did they walk away?" She reached for an empty bowl and filled it with rice, placed it by the door. "For the living," she whispered, then placed another with nothing in it. "For the ghosts." Days passed. Then weeks. Dusty never left her side again. He did not run into the forest. He did not bark at strangers. Only watched. Waited. The wound on his side healed, but the fur never grew back. A pink line remained a mark that seemed to glow whenever the oil lamp flickered. Hun called it his medal. One rainy night, she opened the chest beneath her bed. Inside, a notebook, a fountain pen, a sheet of thin paper imported long ago from Saigon. She wrote slowly, in French, in the same ink she once used to grade grammar exams. A letter to someone who may have died, or may have disappeared, or may be watching the same moon in another country. "James, asterisk, you are probably gone. Killed in the jungle, like too many others, but Dusty returned. And I believe he walked with you again. I wanted you to know, I never told my son who you were, only that you needed saving. And he chose to let you live. If that was the only mercy this war ever gave me, it was enough. Dusty stays beside me now. He watches the forest every morning, like he is still waiting for you to come limping through the fog. If he could speak, I think he would say, "It was not your fault. None of it was. If you are alive, stay alive. That is all I ask." None. She folded the letter, placed it in a jar, and buried it beneath the mango tree behind her home, next to the spot where Dusty liked to sleep. That night, Dusty dreamed. He twitched, kicked, let out a low bark once, then twice. Nunhun watched him from her mat, whispered, "I Isayuna Vale." Hesser Zeit. Where are you going now? But the dog only snored softly, chasing ghosts through tall grass. Part 7, Three Paths That Crossed Once. May 1965, southern edge of the Annamite Mountains. Near the Laotian border, the jungle crackled with tension. The dry season had broken early. Leaves lay brittle under boots, and the wind carried whispers of things about to happen. Private James Riley had been cleared for limited duty, but he was not the same soldier who dropped out of a plane weeks earlier. He walked with a slight limp now, carried fewer assumptions, and carried more silence. When asked where his dog had gone, he only said, "Back home." No one knew that meant a patch of earth behind a mango tree across enemy lines. Then the orders came. A recon unit had gone missing near Hill 327. The jungle was too thick for choppers. Boots had to go in. James volunteered. "I know the terrain," he said. The co hesitated. "Your leg. I can do it." They handed him a map, a compass, and 2 Vietnamese guides. What they did not know, Hill 327 was less than 5 kilometers from the clearing where none once hid him, and Dusty once slept with his head across James' chest. They moved at dawn. Thick fog clung low to the roots. Every shadow felt like memory. Every snapped twig could have been a rifle cocking. By midday, the guides stopped. Smoke, faint, recent. James crouched, took out his binoculars, and saw them. 3 figures, one wounded, sitting under a camouflaged tarp. Brown uniforms. Viet Cong. His blood chilled. Then his breath caught. One of them, the tallest, turned slightly. James did not need the glasses to recognize the scar across the brow. Quan. The guides looked at James. Waited. He did not speak. He scanned the area. They were outnumbered if more VCs were nearby. He could leave, return with firepower, or... He looked at Quan again. No weapons in hand. A bloodied shoulder. The other 2 were barely conscious. He thought of none, of tarot and French grammar books, of Dusty's spark splitting the silence between them. He made his decision. James rose from cover, lifted his rifle, and shouted, "Ayun Yi Bun! Kok Bang Bun! Don T shoot!" Quan jerked his head up, instinctively reaching for a weapon, but then froze. His eyes locked onto James. Recognition flashed like lightning. Then came the silence. The other 2 Viet Cong stirred weakly. James took one slow step forward. Rifle lowered. Hands open. "I am alone," he said. "I am not here to kill." Quan narrowed his eyes. "Why come?" James paused, then said, "For her." They stared at each other. No jungle, no flags, just 2 sons of mothers with tired hearts. Quan took a long breath, then dropped his rifle. James dropped his. They did not shake hands, but they did not raise their weapons either. Dusty was nowhere in sight, but somehow they both felt him there, in the wind, in the dirt, in the invisible thread that pulled them back into each other's lives. That night, James did not return to camp. He stayed in the jungle with Cong, dressing wounds, boiling water. No one spoke of ideology, only of pain and of people. Before sunrise, Cong spoke first. She never knew. About me, I lied to her. Every time. James said, she knew. Cong looked at him. She knew, and she loved you anyway. Quan's voice broke. I am not what she deserved. Neither am I. James said. They sat together, silent. The war raged miles away. But here for one breath of time there was peace. When the sun rose, they went separate ways. James left behind a water canteen. Cong left behind a folded leaf with something inside. A sliver of nun's handwriting. A torn corner of a letter. Just 4 words. If you live, live. James returned to base alone. When asked what he saw, he said, trees, fog. Nothing else. Part 8, a grave with no name. Autumn 1966, Quang Traffer Province. Vietnam. The war had moved north, then south, then everywhere. But some places, it simply passed through, leaving silence where stories used to live. None lived in silence now. The village school was gone, the fields overgrown. The neighbors whispered less. Some had left, some had joined, some had never come back. Only none remained. And Dusty, he walked slower now, the scar on his flank never fully healed. But he still followed her to the market road, still sat at the foot of her mat when she boiled water for tea she no longer served to guests. Each night, she lit a small candle near the tree behind her house and whispered the names she never said aloud during the day. Quan, Nu Con Kun Sung, Sai Travai. James, Nu Con Kun Sung, Hai Quai, My Lalelia QQig Tau Ten. Then one day, Dusty did not come to the kitchen. She found him under the jackfruit tree, breathing, shallow, eyes closed. She sat beside him, rested a hand on his chest. Ling Zi, she whispered. Dusty opened his eyes once, blinking slowly, as if recognizing her voice not with ears, but memory. Then he pressed his nose to her palm and exhaled one final time. She buried him that evening, just beyond the mango tree. She used a hoe. Though her hands shook, she wrapped him in the brown cloth of an old obi-bai, laid him gently between 2 large stones, and pressed one palm into the soft clay before it dried. The next morning, she marked the grave with a single word. Earth. myth, no year, no epitaph, no mention of what he did, because what he did, no stone could explain. For months, she sat by the grave at dusk, talking to the dirt like it might respond. She brought rice in a bowl, water in a chipped cup, a letter sealed in wax written in French. Never sent. Sometimes she heard barking far off in the night. Once, she stood and whispered, "James," into the wind. Only the trees replied. In the years that followed, Nun's hair grayed, her steps slowed, her voice grew hoarse, but the grave stayed clean, always swept, always watched, and the name etched in stone, the name of a creature who never cared about uniforms, remained the only name she needed to remember. Then came 1975. The war ended. Flags changed. Faces returned. Graves were rebuilt. But hers, the grave of Dusty, stayed untouched. Because the villagers remembered. They remembered a dog who guarded her door. A dog who once led a man limping through the fog. A dog who did not choose sides. In 1984, Nun passed quietly in her sleep. No family. No ceremony. No priest. But a neighbor buried her beneath the jackfruit tree, close to the mound-marked Zeit. Together again, where loyalty once slept and kindness once defied orders. And beneath that soil, where roots tangled like memories, lay a dog who had carried 3 souls across the war, and a woman who had saved more lives than any rifle ever did. Part 9, The Return. March 2025, Quang Trot Province, Vietnam. James Riley stood under a mango tree, his cane sinking into the soil. It had rained that morning. The ground was soft, like it remembered. He looked at the grave again, the same one the old man had shown him on the first day. No name, no date, just a paw print and the word. The photo he brought faded, but intact lay at the base of the stone now. In it, a woman in a plain blouse, her arm resting on a thin, scrappy dog with a crooked tail. And James, 22, with his uniform half-buttoned and a bandage peeking beneath his collar. He touched the stone and whispered, "You remember me, do not you, boy?" A local man, early 60s. Barefoot, cigarette in hand, approached from the path. "You American?" he asked in clear but heavy English. James nodded. "Used to be." The man pointed to the grave. "You know story of this dog?" James chuckled. "He is the only reason I am here." The man raised an eyebrow. "You knew?" "None." James turned to him slowly. "I loved her," he said softly. "Not the way you think, not like young people love each other, but the way a dying man loves the voice that chooses not to let him die." The man said nothing, just looked at the grave. Then, after a pause, added, "She is buried there." He pointed to the spot beneath the jackfruit tree, next to him. Few people know that. James swallowed hard, His hands trembled. He walked to the second grave. Smaller. Simpler. No marker, just a smooth, flat stone, weather-worn and clean, a single flower vase. No flowers. James crouched slowly, painfully, and placed a letter on the stone. The same letter he had rewritten in 1965. The one he had sealed and trusted to strangers. The one that never reached her. It was yellowed now, torn at the edges. He placed it gently, then reached into his satchel and pulled out a worn dog collar, cracked leather, the buckle rusted, but the tag still legible. Riley Dusty, 1965. He laid it between the graves. James sat in the grass for a long time. The wind moved through the leaves like a whispered language. He did not speak, not at first. Then, as if breaking a dam inside himself, he said, "I did not come back because I was afraid it would hurt too much. But I was wrong. It did not hurt. It healed." Behind him, the old man cleared his throat. "You know, people here, they remember the dog, not the war, not the soldiers." The dog. James smiled through wet eyes. Then he did his job. That evening, James stayed in a nearby guest house, but before sunset, he walked back to the graves with a lantern. He sat between them and read aloud slowly, shakily, the letter that had waited 60 years to be heard. "I do not know if you ever read this, none, but if you can hear me, know this. Your mercy taught me more than my training ever did, and your dog, our dog, was the only creature in Vietnam who did not care what flag I wore. I wish I would come sooner, but I am here now. I kept the promise." The wind picked up, and for a moment, it sounded like paws in the grass. A rustle. A breath, a familiar warmth. James looked up, smiling at nothing. "I know, Dusty," he said. "You always come when it matters." Part 10, The Dog Between Worlds. March 2025, Quang Trot Province, Vietnam. James Riley stayed 3 more days. Not to sightsee, not to preach, just to sit by 2 unmarked graves and remember what most men spend their lives trying to forget. On the second morning, he brought a small wooden sign he had carved himself carefully with trembling hands. It read only, "He chose people, not sides." He placed it between the 2 resting places, then stepped back and exhaled, not in grief, but in quiet release. Later that day, a group of local schoolchildren passed by on bicycles. One girl stopped, looked at the sign. "See, she asked. James smiled. "Yes, a dog, but not just any dog." She pointed at the paw print on the stone. "Tani namio thy teach." He nodded. "In my country, we called him Dusty. But your name for him, it is better." The girl squatted, touched the dirt, then stood and said, "Kanshanai, Sia Leon." James nodded again, slowly. "Yes." He whispered, "He does." That evening, James received a visitor, a thin man in his late 70s. Sharp cheekbones, narrow eyes. He introduced himself with a gentle bow. "My name is Quan." James stood slowly. Didn't he speak? They stared at each other, not like enemies, not like strangers, like two men who survived the same wound. "I never thanked you," Quan said. "I never blamed you," James replied. They sat beside the graves, saying little. Finally, James broke the silence. "She knew who you were all along." Quan blinked. "I think she knew who I was, too," James added. "But she never asked for anything, except that I leave alive." Quan stared at the paw print. He came back to her. "I never did. You both came back," James said. They did not hug. Didn't he exchange addresses? But when they parted, Quan placed something in James' hand, an old rusted dog tag with Riley. G. Barely legible. "I kept it," he said. "She buried it. I dug it up after she died. Thought, maybe someday." James closed his fist around it. His eyes stung. "Thank you," he whispered. At sunrise, James prepared to leave Vietnam. Before boarding the van, he returned one last time to the tree. He bent slowly, placed the dog tag between the graves, then whispered, "I brought it home." On the flight back to Reno, he stared out the window for a long time, at the clouds, the rivers, the invisible borderlines drawn by men who never bled on them. Then he closed his eyes, and in that quiet space between memory and dream, he felt it, dusty, running, free, unburdened, chasing wind through grass no war had ever burned. Back in Nevada, James hung a frame in his hallway. No medals, no certificates, just one faded photo. A woman, a soldier, and between them a dog, tail curled, staring straight into the camera, as if he knew he would be the one to carry the story home.